Good evening and welcome to the Melbourne Writers Festival and to this session, Power, Propaganda and the Silence of Writers with John Pilger. I'm Brett Miller. I'm a director of the Melbourne Writers Festival and I'll be chairing tonight's session. This year's Melbourne Writers Festival celebrates Melbourne's new status as a UNESCO City of Literature, only the second city in the world to receive such a status. This designation recognises Melbourne's rich literary heritage and our strong contemporary literary culture. If this is your first Writers' Festival session, you may be wondering why there are two chairs on the stage when only one person will be sitting in them at a time. There has been a long-standing tradition at our festival to have an empty chair on stage to highlight the work of International Pen. International Pen is a leading voice of writers worldwide. Founded in 1921, its members are united in a common concern for the craft of writing and a commitment to freedom of expression through the written word. This year, the Melbourne Pen Centre has joined with the Melbourne Writers Festival to bring attention to the plight of writers who have been persecuted for the peaceful pursuit of their craft. The empty chair represents a missing writer who has been either detained, attacked, murdered, placed under house arrest, forced into exile, or hiding, or received death threats. While we enjoy this evening's session, we should also remember the many writers worldwide who have been denied the freedom and human rights we take for granted. Nobody embodies the spirit and ethos of International Pen more than John Pilger. For 40 years, he has been an impassioned critic of foreign, military and economic adventures by Western governments. It is too easy, he says, for Western journalists to see humanity in terms of its usefulness to our interests and to follow government agendas that ordain good and bad tyrants, worthy and unworthy victims, and present our policies as always benign when the opposite is quite often true. It is the journalist's job, he says, first of all, to look in the mirror of his own society. John is known for his polemical style, which has attracted both praise and criticism. Harold Pinter has said of his work, John Pilger is fearless. He unearths, with steely attention to facts, the filthy truth and tells it as it is. The more conservative Auberon Waugh, on the other hand, coined the verb to pilger, meaning to present information in a sensationalist manner to reach a foregone conclusion. Noam Chomsky stated that the reason why journalists have invented terms such as to pilger and to pilgerise is because when faced with the uncomfortable facts about the consequences of US foreign policy, ridicule is their only possible response. The conservative commentator Gerard Henderson, one of Pilger's most vocal critics, has accused him in effect of being a conspiracy theorist. But for me, John Simpson, the BBC's World Affairs editor, summed it up best when he said, "A country that does not have a John Pilger in its journalism is a very feeble place indeed." Please welcome John Pilger.
My first assignment as an investigative journalist was around the time of my 18th birthday. I was working the graveyard shift on the Sydney Sun, and my job was to investigate potential crime stories on the local police radio. On my second night, I fell asleep. The next morning, I found myself in front of the news editor, whose name was Big Lou and wore blue suede shoes. "Do you know what we've missed because of you?" Big Lou shouted at me, waving a copy of our rival's front page which said, "Police probe models fatal fling." "That's what we missed because of you," said Big Lou, whereupon I passed out at his feet. When I came to, I could hear a voice saying, "Hey Lou, maybe he's got a weak heart or something, maybe you've killed him." So I moved to another paper, another assignment. This time I was sent to investigate why a swarm of bees had nested on a car parked in a shopping centre. The police had summoned a bee man who was at work in his anti-bee shroud when I arrived. Guided by terror, I forged through the crowd and said to the bee man, "Excuse me," whereupon I was stung between the eyes and passed out. The next day, all the newspapers, including my own, published a picture of the only victim of the mystery bees, sitting in the gutter with his head in his hands. It was me. So I was sent to cover the coroner's court. On my second day, the coroner, a man with a suitably dark sense of humour, decided that the cadet reporters should see the morgue down below the court. So down we went. "This is where you'll learn about life," said the coroner, unveiling a corpse, whereupon I passed out. Now, I mention these episodes because there's an important element of black farce in what we do as journalists and writers, and especially in the pretensions of the high and mighty who depend on us to promote their ambitions and to cover their omissions. For that reason, my favourite film is Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, and my favourite book is Joseph Heller's Catch-22. Both are about absurdity, the farce of war. I often think that what Kubrick and Heller did was give us a way of seeing that both contemporary journalism and realist writing lack or have abdicated. Now, this requires an empathy with humanity, with us, with our frailties, absurdities, and above all, our rights, along with a deep scepticism of those who exercise power over us. And perhaps falling on my face in those early days helped me understand the importance of these frailties and absurdities and of seeing the world from the ground up, not from the top down. The critical element here is memory. According to the American magazine Time, we now live in what's called an eternal present. It's as if the task of journalists and writers is to keep us fixated on the ephemeral and to limit our horizons to our navels. Look at me, woe is me, page after page of McFreud. It's as if our past exists only as self-serving nostalgia, especially in Australia. And yet what makes Australia different and interesting, its ancient people and the achievements of its political upstarts have been subjected to an organised forgetting. Who knows the uniqueness of Aboriginality? Who knows that true national independence and pride comes not from gold medals, but understanding the secrets of our own country and doing right by our first people? Who knows that hope and inspiration for our young people come not from flags and the rituals of the 25th of April, but from, for example, the women who led the popular movement to stop soldiers being sent to the slaughter of 1914-18, and they won. For Kevin Rudd to say that there's no higher calling, as he did the other day, than the military is either stupidity or cynicism, take your pick. Who knows that Australians won the world's first 35-hour working week, half a century ahead of Europe and America, along with the world's first pension and child benefits and minimum wage, all of which are the bedrock of your prosperity and mine. It's as if our political imagination is something to be pacified, not primed. Our two main parties are now virtually identical. They form a facade behind which their shared assumptions are no longer open, it seems, to serious challenge. The role of the media is critical in maintaining this, We have democracy by media, just as we have war by media, culture by media, trial by media, patriotism by media, and silence by media. In this way, the boundaries of so much of public debate are fixed. In almost everything we see, hear and read in the media, political doctrine is insinuated as a presupposition. Without irony, this is called free speech. In fact, it's censorship by omission. Now let's consider these omissions, these silences. The social and cultural destruction of a whole nation, Iraq, is well underway. It's a Holocaust. At least 1 million people have died. And that figure comes on top of the 1 million Iraqis who died as a result of the blockade of the 1990s in which Australia took part. According to UNICEF, 500,000 Iraqi children never reached the age of 5. Does anyone remember these children? I thought about them when I watched the evening news on which happy Australian families farewelled their loved ones in the Navy as they sailed off to impose that murderous blockade. I thought about these children last Tuesday when the media again showed tearful Navy families as HMAS Parramatta sailed off to take part in what the Sydney Morning Herald called the rehabilitation of Iraq. Rehabilitation? Really? Children die in Iraq, in their hospitals there, because there are no syringes, no surgical gloves, no life-saving drugs, none of the things we take for granted on this cosy winter's night. During all the years of the slave trade, the death toll was less than the carnage in Iraq in the past 17 years. We have no sense of this Holocaust in Australia. With a few honourable exceptions, there are no politicians, no writers, no journalists, no academics speaking out, calling us to account. Just silence. Having denounced the lies of his predecessor, Kevin Rudd is silent about the lie that his government is withdrawing from Iraq. In fact, less than half the number of Australians are coming home. How does this propaganda of silence actually work? After all, it's a media society we live in, one with a lot of media noise. Well, a few months ago, President Bush's former spokesman, Scott McClellan, confessed that almost everything he said about Iraq on behalf of Bush was a lie. What was interesting about this confession was the way McClellan described the journalists who put out his lies. He called them complicit enablers. What he was saying, in effect, was that the media's echoing of Bush's lies and Blair's lies and Howard's lies made the attack on Iraq possible. Let's look at another way. Let's imagine that we journalists in free societies had done our job, that we challenged and revealed and set the record straight. Had we done that, perhaps 1 million people might be alive today. In his classic work, Obedience to Authority, the psychologist Stanley Milgram wrote this, and I quote, "There's always some element of bad form in objecting to the destructive course of events, or indeed in making it a topic of conversation. Thus, in Nazi Germany, even among those most closely identified with the final solution, it was considered an act of discourtesy to talk about the killings," unquote. Do you recognise that bad form, that discourtesy? Take the war on terror. 9/11 and Bali were gross acts of terrorism, but they were tiny compared with the state terrorism carried out in our name and which is almost never reported that way. Since 1945, the United States has overthrown 50 governments, many of them democracies. Liberation movements have been crushed, people in straw houses bombed. In Cambodia, 750,000 peasants were bombed to death before Pol Pot took power. All that is documented.